My sister stole credit for the $3,000 I sent my parents. They kicked me out on Christmas for lying, but the next day I took them to the ATM, and the truth broke them. I'm 28 years old. I work in digital marketing, and what happened 2 days ago on Christmas basically destroyed my entire family dynamic, but it also freed me from something I'd been carrying my whole life. I guess I should start from the beginning, because the Christmas Eve and Christmas story doesn't make sense without understanding how the relationship with my parents and my sister Natalie has always been. For as long as I can remember, Natalie has been the golden child of the family. She's 2 years younger than me, so like 26, and basically everything she does is perfect in my parents' eyes. When we were kids, I'd get good grades, like averages of 8 seconds and 9 seconds, and my parents would say, "Oh, that's nice, Maya." But when Natalie got the same, it was like she'd won a Nobel Prize. You know what I mean? My mom would call all the aunts to tell them. My dad would take her out to dinner to celebrate, and I'd be there like, seriously? I did exactly the same thing last month, and they didn't even mention it. But anyway, that's how things always were. And I grew up used to being the forgotten daughter, the one who had to try twice as hard to get half the attention. My parents live in a small town like 2 hours from where I live now. My dad worked in construction for years until he had back problems, and my mom teaches English at an elementary school. They're not doing badly financially, but they don't have money left over either, you know? They live day to day like a lot of families. Natalie lives in the same city as me, but on the other side. She works in sales of something. I've never really understood what she does exactly. But according to her, she's doing super well, although I have my doubts. In July of this year, like 6 months ago, my mom called me one day. It was weird because she almost never calls me. She normally talks to Natalie and that's it. So when I saw her name on the screen, I got nervous, thinking something serious had happened. I answered and she was like, uncomfortable. I could tell in her voice. And she told me they needed help with some bills, that they'd had unexpected expenses, and if I could lend them some money. She clarified that she'd also ask Natalie, just so I wouldn't think they were only asking me, and I told her yes, of course. How much did they need? The truth is, I earn well. I'm not a millionaire, but I have enough to live comfortably and save a little. I told them I could send them $500 a month, no problem, that it wasn't a loan but a gift, not to worry about paying it back. My mom got all emotional and told me, thank you so much, that Natalie had also offered to send them the same amount, and that between the two of us we were helping them a lot. I set up an automatic transfer from my bank account to theirs, and from July to December, I was religiously sending them $500 every month. That adds up to $3,000 total. It's not a small amount of money. During those months, every time I talked to my mom, which wasn't often, she'd call like once a month. She'd thank me in passing for the money. But most of the conversation was about Natalie. That Natalie had gotten an important new client, that Natalie was thinking about buying a new car, that Natalie this, Natalie that. I'd half listen and respond, that's great. I'm happy for her. While thinking, well, at least they're receiving the money and it's helping them. That's what matters. Christmas Eve arrived, and I drove the 2 hours to my parents' house. Natalie arrived like half an hour after me, with a bunch of bags of expensive gifts, and my parents received her like she was a celebrity or something. My mom literally screamed, "Oh, honey, you look so beautiful," and my dad immediately helped her with the bags. I had arrived earlier with my own gifts. Nothing ostentatious, but things I thought they'd like, and they basically said hi, Maya, and continued setting the table. Dinner was normal at first. We ate turkey and all the typical Christmas stuff. And then my mom raised her glass and said, I want to make a special toast to Natalie, because thanks to her generosity and her big heart, we've been able to get through these last months. My dad added, yes, we don't know what we would have done without your help, honey. You're an angel. And Natalie put on that fake modesty face that bothers me so much and said, oh no, that's what family is for. You would do the same for me. And I sat there like, what? I waited to see if they'd mention my name, thinking that maybe afterwards they were going to say, oh, and Maya too. But no, only Natalie. They drank and kept talking about how wonderful Natalie was for sending them money every month. I felt the blood rising to my face. I could literally feel the heat. And I said, wait. I've been sending you money too. All three of them turned to look at me like I'd said something in Chinese. My mom frowned and said, what? And I repeated that I'd also been sending them $500 a month since July, that I'd set up automatic transfers. Natalie laughed. like an uncomfortable laugh, and said, Maya, what's wrong with you? Why are you saying that? And I said, because it's true. Mom, you called me in July to ask for help and I've been sending you money every month? My mom shook her head and said, no, Maya. I only asked Natalie for help. I never called you. I froze because that was a lie. Totally and completely a lie. But my mom was saying it with all the conviction in the world. My dad intervened and said, Maya, I don't know why you're making this up. Natalie is the one who has helped us. We have receipts of her transfers. And Natalie very calmly took out her phone and said, yes. Here they are. Look. And showed them screenshots of supposed transfers. I grabbed my phone to show them my own transfers from my banking app. I opened the application and right at that moment it got stuck, loading and an error message appeared. I tried closing it and opening it again. Nothing. The Wi-Fi in the house is horrible. It always has been. And at that moment my data signal was also really bad. I said, give me a second. The app is glitching, but let me go where there's better signal and I'll show you. My dad said, no, Maya. That's enough. This is ridiculous. Natalie put on a victim face and said, I can't believe you're trying to steal credit for something I did. Why do you hate me so much? And I exploded and said, because you're lying. The money came out of my account. I have the confirmations. My mom got up from the table and said, Maya, shut up. How dare you accuse your sister like this on Christmas Eve? You should be ashamed. I kept trying with the app, but it wouldn't load. And meanwhile, my parents kept yelling at me that I was a liar and jealous. My dad finally said, you know what? Get out of my house. I don't want you here. If you're going to act like this. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Like that feeling when you can't breathe. I said, are you serious? You're going to kick me out for telling the truth. And my dad pointed at the door and repeated, leave. Now. I grabbed my purse, didn't even collect my gifts or my coat, and got out of there. It was like 9 at night on Christmas Eve, and I was standing there on the street with my car, crying like an idiot. I couldn't process what had just happened. I'd been sending them money for months, my own money earned from my work, and they were treating me like a liar and kicking me out of the house while Natalie took all the credit. I drove without really knowing where to go. The town is small and there aren't many options. I found a coffee shop that was open 24 hours, one of those kind of ugly places, but at least it had Wi-Fi. I sat there with a cup of coffee I didn't even want and tried the banking app again. It still wasn't working well. It would open but wouldn't load the complete transaction history. I called the bank's customer service, but it was Christmas Eve and obviously there was no one. Just an automated message saying they were closed until the 26th. I didn't know what to do or where to go. My parents had kicked me out. I couldn't go back to my apartment because it was 2 hours away and it was already late, and the idea of driving that upset didn't seem safe. I called my cousin Nina, who lives like 20 minutes from there. Nina is 32 and has always been more like a big sister to me than a cousin. I told her everything that had happened, crying so hard I could barely speak, and she told me, come here immediately. You're staying here tonight. I got to Nina's house like at 11 at night. She received me with a hug and gave me tea and basically let me vent for like an hour. I kept saying, I can't believe they did this to me, that they chose to believe Natalie over me without even giving me a chance to prove anything. Nina told me, look, tomorrow we're going to fix this, but right now you need to sleep. She lent me clothes to sleep in and set me up in her guest room. But obviously I couldn't sleep much. I was awake until 4 in the morning, turning everything over in my head. On Christmas morning, I woke up like at 7, exhausted but calmer. And the first thing I did was look for another way to prove the transfers, because the app still wasn't working well for me. And then I remembered that the bank sent me email confirmations of each transfer. I opened my email and searched for messages from the bank. And there they were. 13 emails, one for the initial setup and one for each of the 6 months, confirming the automatic transfers of $500 to my parents' account. I showed Nina the emails and she said, perfect. This is enough proof. Let's confront your parents right now. I was nervous because part of me was afraid they wouldn't believe me with the emails either, but Nina insisted we had to go. We got in her car because mine was still parked at the coffee shop from the night before. We picked it up, and then I drove following Nina to my parents' house. We arrived like at 10 in the morning. Nina knocked on the door because I was shaking so much I couldn't even move my arms well. My mom opened, and when she saw us, she looked surprised and said, "What are you doing here?" Nina very calmly said, "We're here to clear up what happened last night, and we're coming in, whether you like it or not." My mom stepped aside and we went in. Natalie was there in the living room with my dad, still in pajamas, drinking coffee like nothing. My dad stood up and said, "I already told you I didn't want Maya here after last night." Nina raised her hand and said, "Everyone sit down. Maya is going to explain something and you're going to listen." We sat down. I took out my phone with the emails open. But before I could say anything, Natalie started with a dramatic speech about how she had been sacrificing herself these months to help our parents, and how much it had hurt her that I tried to steal the credit from her the night before, and that honestly, she didn't know if we could have a sister relationship after this. She was talking with a broken voice and everything, acting like she was the victim, and my parents were looking at her with total compassion. When she finished her act, I simply said, "Okay, if you sent the money, then you shouldn't have a problem with us checking the bank accounts together, right?" Natalie turned pale and said, "What? Why would we do that? I already showed you the screenshots last night." Nina intervened and said, "Because screenshots can be easily edited, but bank records don't lie." I took out my phone and said, "I have here the confirmation emails from the bank, each one with the date, the exact amount of $500, and the destination account number, which is Mom and Dad's account." I passed the phone to my mom and she started reading the emails with my dad, looking over her shoulder. I saw how their expressions changed from skepticism to confusion. My dad said, "But Natalie also showed us receipts." I said, "Then let's check everything, right now. Let's go to the nearest ATM and get the official account statements." Natalie tried to get out of it, saying that was unnecessary. Why didn't they believe me with the emails? But my mom was already grabbing her purse and said, "No, let's go. This has to be cleared up once and for all." The 5 of us went in 2 cars to the ATM that's like 5 minutes from the house. On the way, I was driving behind my parents, and I could see that Natalie was in the back seat with her head down, and I knew there was something fishy there. We got to the ATM and my dad put in his card. He pulled out the account statement for the last 6 months, and there were all the transactions, including the deposits they had received. And absolutely all the deposits of $500 that appeared month after month came from my account number. The same number that appeared in my confirmation emails. 0 deposits from Natalie's account. The silence that followed was horrible. My mom turned to look at Natalie and said, "Explain this to me." Natalie tried to say that maybe she had made a mistake, that maybe she had sent the money but to a different account by error. And my dad said, "Natalie, that's enough. It's obvious you lied." Nina added, and not only did she lie, she let them kick Maya out of the house on Christmas Eve for telling the truth. Natalie started crying. But this time, they were real tears, not acted. And she confessed that yes, she had lied, that she hadn't sent them any money, that she had edited fake screenshots because she wanted them to think she was the good and generous daughter. She said she had always been the favorite and was afraid of losing that, and that when she realized I was sending money, she decided to take the credit. My mom put her hands over her mouth and said, "My God, Natalie, how could you?" Natalie yelled something about how it had always been like this, that they had always pressured her to be perfect, and then she ran to her car and left. We stood there in the ATM parking lot on Christmas, my parents holding the paper with the account statement and me not knowing exactly what to feel. We went back to the house, again in a 2-car caravan, and when we arrived, my parents asked me to sit down and talk. My dad started saying, "Maya, we have no words to apologize for what happened last night. We were horribly wrong and we're so sorry." My mom was crying and said they should never have kicked me out, that they should have given me the benefit of the doubt, and that they realized now that for years they had treated me differently than Natalie for no reason. I stayed quiet for a while because honestly I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell at them that yes, my whole life they had made me feel invisible while they celebrated everything Natalie did, but another part of me was just tired. I finally said, "Look, I appreciate the apology, but this isn't just about the money or about last night. This is about decades of feeling like the forgotten daughter. You've never really seen me, and when you had to choose between believing me or believing Natalie, you didn't even hesitate." My dad nodded and said, "You're absolutely right, and we're going to do everything possible to change that, but we understand if you need time." My mom added that they loved me and deeply regretted everything. Nina, who had been there the whole time in silence, said, "I think Maya needs to process this. So we're going to leave, but we can talk later more calmly." I said goodbye to my parents and Nina and I left. I spent the rest of Christmas at her house. We ate leftovers from the dinner she had prepared and watched bad movies on Netflix. Nina told me she was proud of me for insisting on proving the truth. and I thanked her for supporting me when no one else did. It's been 2 days since that. Natalie hasn't tried to contact me, and honestly, I don't know if I want her to. My parents have sent me like 10 messages asking for forgiveness and saying they want to fix things. I've responded cordially, but the truth is I'm still processing everything. I don't know if our relationship can really change after so many years of this, but at least now they know the truth, and that took a huge weight off my shoulders. This morning my mom called to say they're going to start going to family therapy, the three of them, if I want to join, to work on the dynamic they created all these years. I told her I'd think about it. Nina says I should go to at least some sessions, that it could help, and she's probably right, but I'm not ready to commit to that yet. What I do know is that I'm not going to allow them to treat me like I'm invisible or less important anymore. That night on Christmas Eve, when they kicked me out of the house for telling the truth, something changed in me. I realized that I'd been waiting my whole life for my parents to see me, to value me, and that maybe that was never going to happen the way I wanted. And that's okay, I guess. I can't control how they treat me, but I can control how much I let it affect me. The money I sent wasn't to win their love or approval. It was genuinely to help them because they're my parents and they were going through a difficult time. That Natalie took the credit says more about her than about me, and that my parents believed her without questioning says more about the family dynamic than about my worth as a person. Nina told me yesterday that sometimes families need to explode in order to rebuild themselves in a healthier way, and I think she's right. I don't know what's going to happen with my relationship with my parents or with Natalie, but at least now everything is on the table. There are no more secrets or lies, just the naked truth of how things have always been, and that, although painful, is also liberating in a certain way.